This idea that a child at any age can choose a gender and that's it, everyone has to affirm that for the rest of their life, is nonsense. The school is actively transitioning the child. They're changing their name, their pronouns, their teams. Everybody knows except the parents. This is where we are in the state of California, that if we introduce legislation that just says that parents have a right to know what's happening with their kids, this is considered hate in the state of California. That's the position of the Democrat Party. They're not interested in educating kids, they're interested in indoctrinating. The official policy of the state of California is that parents are a hate group. It's really frightening.
Hello and welcome. My name is Tim Shaw. I serve as a trustee on the Orange County Board of Education from the 4th District. And this year I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Orange County Board of Education. I am joined today by California State Assemblyman Bill Essayli. Assemblyman Essayli represents the 63rd Assembly District. Bill, great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't you tell us what the 63rd Assembly District encompasses?
Yeah, so I represent Western Riverside County, includes the communities of Norco, Corona, Eastvale, Lake Elsinore, Menifee, Canyon Lake, and parts of Riverside, so right up to the boundary of Orange County.
Great. So Assemblyman Essayli, we've seen a lot of media attention and controversy this year around a piece of legislation you authored, so we wanted to take a chance, a moment here to explain to folks what that was. It's Assembly Bill 1314 or 1314 that you authored. So why don't you tell us what that bill is all about and why it was necessary?
Yeah, no, I felt this is an important bill. So first, to back up, last year while I was running, I heard about multiple incidences and cases in which parents were suing school districts because they found out that schools were actively transitioning their kids without their permission or consent. They were finding out after the fact. And it really just brought this issue to the forefront of why are schools withholding information, sensitive information from parents? And they didn't declare that as a policy, but that was the effect of the decisions the schools were doing. So what I did is I wrote a bill. It's very simple. It just says that if a kid is going to transition at school, you have to notify the parents. So it's a parental notification bill. So that's really all the bill does. It doesn't prevent anyone from transitioning. It doesn't prevent the school from providing any services. It just says parents have to know about it.
Now, Assemblyman Essayli, you're an accomplished attorney before entering the state legislature. So let me present to you a hypothetical, as attorneys often present hypotheticals. So hypothetically, we have a 15-year-old student, a sophomore in high school. He's known as Frank. One day he shows up at school, says, "Hi everybody, I'd like to be known as Sally now. I'm going to be known as she and her. I'm going to use the girls' bathroom. I was on the boys' soccer team. I'd like to now play on the girls' soccer team and use the girls' locker room to change and so on." If that were to happen, and they say, one other thing, I don't want anyone to tell my mom and dad. What obligations is the school under if that such a thing were to happen?
So the first part of that scenario is clear. California law allows any student to change their gender, and the schools have to recognize it. So the school would recognize his new name and pronouns as a her, she, and allow him or her to compete on the sports team that they identify with. So that's settled law. That's the state of law in California. Nothing changes. The second part of your question is really where the ambiguity is, and I think some people are trying to regulate this area without legislating, and that's where the bureaucracy comes in. There is no law that says schools are allowed to withhold information from parents. In fact, I would argue that it's unconstitutional to withhold information from parents. Schools don't have any authority to withhold information from parents. But the Department of Education for the state of California put out a frequently asked questions guidance which suggested to schools that children have a right to privacy and that they should not disclose any information to parents without the student's consent. That is completely legally flawed. There's no law that supports that. There's no case law. It's totally made up. And that's part of the reason I introduced this bill, because I wanted there to be a clear record that not only can they tell the parents, but I wanted to make it government policy that you must tell the parents. So to answer your question, I don't believe a school has legal authority to withhold that information from parents. And if challenged, and there are some cases making their way through the courts right now, I think the courts will ultimately rule that it's unconstitutional because the Supreme Court has said parents have a right to raise their children. And the schools can't interfere in that relationship.
Now, I presented to you a hypothetical, but in fact, there are incidents of students changing genders at school, and I feel like the schools are sort of like, oh gosh, what do we do? Do we tell the parents? Do we not tell the parents? What are our obligations here? So have you been taking note of how many situations we have like that in reality in your district or in this state?
Well, the only cases we know about are the ones that become public, right? We don't know about all the cases that parents don't know about. But parents have found out, some parents have filed lawsuits challenging that practice at those schools. And really, the question for these school officials that nobody asks them is, what authority do they have to withhold information? That's never been answered. I've never seen any answer to that question. They just claim that kids have a right to privacy. I say, where? Show me where there's any law or case or judge who's ever said that children have a right to privacy from their parents. I've never heard that.
As you know, we at the Orange County Board of Education, have a tradition of supporting parents and parental rights. And so we as a board took a vote to formally endorse Assembly Bill 1314 because we felt that parents should know if something like that is happening with their child at school, they're changing gender. So we did formally, as a board, endorse the legislation and the passage of that legislation. But we've been hearing from a number of our constituents at our meetings, our monthly meetings, that this legislation is transphobic. It's because of hatred for transgender people. What would you say to a critic who says that this bill is really because you hate transgender kids, and you're trying to force the outing of transgender kids?
Well, I would say that if they actually look at the studies, NPR put a study out early this year, this legislation will help those children. Number one, we know these kids are higher risk for mental health issues. A child experiencing gender dysphoria is at higher risk for depression, anxiety, and suicide. So for the parents to not know and to not be involved in their journey, whatever that journey may lead to, whatever it is, I think is frankly child abuse and child neglect. The parent has to be involved. They need to be on the lookout for these signs, these mental health issues, and help the child navigate through that process. Just like any other issue a child's going through in their life, the parent's there to support them and to navigate that. So to keep the parents in the dark, I think is dangerous to trans children. Secondly, we're not outing anyone. We're talking about a student who has basically gone public at school. The school is actively transitioning the child. They're changing their name, their pronouns, their teams. Everybody knows except the parents. So this isn't an outing. I think that's just that's a scare tactic that they use. And lastly, this idea that a child at any age can choose a gender and that's it, everyone has to affirm that for the rest of their life, is nonsense. Most children we know do not persist in that gender identity post-puberty. Almost half or more than half of the kids don't persist with that. So this idea that a child at any age just makes a decision about their gender and it's sort of everyone in the world has to accept this and move on with it is not true. It's not accurate. I don't think it's in the best interest of the children.
Now, what is the official status of the bill that you authored, AB 1314? Where are we at in the process?
Yeah, the bill was introduced. It was referred to the Education Committee. The chair of that committee has refused to hear the bill. He said he does not want to give a platform for hate. So this is where we are in the state of California, that if we introduce legislation that just says that parents have a right to know what's happening with their kids, this is considered hate in the state of California. That's the position of the Democrat Party in Sacramento. They think parents are dangerous to the kids and that this information will endanger those kids' lives. That's really dangerous rhetoric, that the official policy of the state of California is that parents are a hate group. It's really frightening. The bill is technically still alive. It's eligible to be heard, and it's alive until the end of the legislative session next year.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that usually a tactic used where there's a bill they could vote down, but they don't want to put their members on record having to vote down a bill that the majority of Californians would agree with. So this is a way of kind of shelving a bill or killing a bill without putting anyone on the official record. Do I have that?
Yeah, absolutely. If they don't want to take a difficult vote, they don't actually want to take a position on where they stand on parental rights, they hide behind this rhetoric and they just don't hear the bill. It's kind of put your fingers in your ear and scream, la, 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 we're not listening. And so that's why it's our job to communicate. And the Democrats certainly have the votes to do that in Sacramento, but where they don't have the votes is on the local level. And that's where we're moving with this initiative now. We are working with school districts to implement this as a local policy instead of a state policy.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I was going to ask you, so how can a local school district, what rights do they have and what should they be doing in this area?
Yeah, so we've really pushed on this issue. There's no law that prohibits schools from notifying parents about the gender identity of a student. So schools now, and Chino Valley is going to be the first district to implement this policy, hopefully here soon, where they're going to make it a school district policy to notify them, not just when a kid wants to transgender their identity, but also if they're experiencing other hardships at school, if they're injured or in a fight, or they're having mental health issues, or if their school test scores are suffering, they're going to notify parents. So the school's just going on record saying parents have a right to know, not just on this issue, but a range of issues, and that's going to be the official policy of the school district. And that provides clarity to the teacher who's not in limbo about, do I have to pretend to call a kid one thing in front of their parents and then another at school? I don't think that's healthy for the kids either to have two identities. It creates a huge mess, and this just provides clarity, which I think is much needed today.
Thank you. I've wondered about the poor school district, the school administrators who might have, difficult situations, and what is their, right course of action to comply with state law, as well as, probably, you're right, a lot of the local school districts would probably favor informing the parents whenever possible. So is there anything else, someone who's watching at home might think, I should call my school board member, or what should they be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to fight this at the local level. So if you're a concerned parent, and maybe we can link to some information where they can get resources, but go talk to your local school district and ask them what their policy is. And if they don't have one, ask them to adopt a written policy. And then when you get pushback from administrators or lawyers or politicians, I would push back on them and ask, what law are you relying on that says parents don't have a right to know? There is no law. I'm telling you, there is no law. So have them cite a statute or a court opinion that says parents don't have a right to know what's going on with their kids. None exists, but they're pretending as if it does.
Well, I just know as a parent myself, I would be very upset if I learned that my child was at school and such an important thing was happening, and they never told me and my wife about it. I got to think that's probably the position of most parents out there, which is why they're trying to get rid of your bill without having a vote.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to say, I'm a former prosecutor, and I will tell you my red flags always go up when there are adults who encourage kids or convince kids to keep secrets from their parents. I think that just leads down a very dangerous path. Kids should not keep secrets from their parents. They should have conversations and dialogue. Parents are there to support the kids, care for them, and provide for their safety. No one is going to have a better interest for that child than their parent. So if there's some stranger out there, or a teacher or a counselor who's encouraging them to keep secrets from parents, I find that very alarming and concerning as well.
Now, a critic might say, what if we have parents that are not affirming this new gender identity, and maybe even, the dad is abusive and beating up on this kid for being transgender? What is your answer to that?
Well, my answer to that is if they have any credible information that the child is in any physical danger, then they have a duty to report. We have lots of statutes and procedures in place to protect children. They have to report it to CPS and local law enforcement. So if there is any credible evidence, they must act on it. But to say that that's the blanket position of the government, that every parent is a danger or a threat to their kid, and therefore we're going to enact these policies, is wrong. We can't make that the assumption that they're always going to be in danger. Are there isolated instances where they might be? Absolutely. And I think in those cases, the teachers, the administrators have an obligation to act in the best interest of that child.
I think about, when I was growing up and as a teenager or a high school student, and I just feel like if I was willing to go to my school and in front of my peers, if I was going to change gender and I was comfortable doing that at school, I mean, I would think I would certainly be as comfortable telling my mom and dad about it. And
Right.
maybe things have changed since I was in high school, but I would think you probably feel safer at home for most kids than, there's bullies at school. And if you're going to announce at school you're a transgender student, I would think you're feeling like you're more likely to get bullied at school for most kids as opposed to home. But that was maybe just my experience.
I would think so too. But you know what? The left is now making parents like I said, they're describing them as a hate group, and they're trying to pit students against parents. And I think this is a larger trend. I mean, if you want to get into political philosophy or whatnot, but they're not interested in educating kids. They're interested in indoctrinating, and they really need to break the bond between the parent and the student in order to indoctrinate them and to condition them to their ideology. And that's a really sacred relationship between parents and students. And what we have now is the government piercing that and getting in between that. I think that's really dangerous. And that's why we have to hold a line on this issue. And this is not negotiable.
Well, thank you, Assemblymember Essayli, for your leadership and advocating for parental rights. And I know as a parent, I commend you and thank you for taking the tough stand and really being a leader on this issue. So.
Well, I appreciate that, and I thank you for raising the issue. Most parents, I think, don't know what's happening at schools, so I encourage them to really ask questions, put in public information requests, and find out what's going on at their schools, and then take action. School boards do have a lot of power, and they can use it. So thank you for doing this, and I hope that this helps out some parents.